Welcome everybody. Welcome to our June webinar, our special webinar on a subject that for me is critical for all of us, and a subject I didn't know what I didn't know. The topic today is everything you didn't know about reproductive longevity. I'm here with Dr. Jennifer Garrison. Jennifer, a pleasure.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah,
it's great to be here.
Jennifer is with the Buck Institute up in the Bay Area. I'll introduce the Buck properly. It's really the leading institution in the field of longevity, run by a dear friend, Dr. Eric Verdin. And as you may know, we do a longevity platinum trip every year. That incredible woman, Claire Adair, runs for me on our team. And a lot of the work here that you're seeing during this webinar was prepped by Claire. So I want to just say thank you to her up front. And during our trip last year, we went and had a session on reproductive longevity, women's reproductive longevity, and it was extraordinary. It truly was. And at the end of that, I was like, I need to help you get this message out because people are not hearing what's going on.
Yeah.
So this is an essential topic, and it's often overlooked, and the topic of women's reproductive longevity. And I really want to help you talk about what's involved and shockingly what we don't know and where this field is going. So let me properly introduce you. Dr. Garrison is faculty director of the Global Consortium for Female Reproductive Longevity and Equality and assistant professor at the Buck, where she serves as associate director of the Buck USC Biology of Aging PhD program. She also holds secondary appointments at UCSF and at the Leonard Davis School of Gerontology at USC. That's pretty good.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's get into this. I'd love you to frame this conversation and why this area of science is so important. And ultimately, what should every woman and every man listening here today know about female reproductive longevity? Because again, the facts that you're going to hear, like I heard, had no idea.
But that's true, that's true. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for hosting me here. I really appreciate the opportunity. So a couple of years ago, the Buck launched this moonshot, essentially to try to solve female reproductive aging. And what you just said, my title, it's a mouthful, right? The Global Consortium, all of these things. But we want to step back and sort of unpack what all of this means. And I think, a lot of women don't know fundamentally what's happening in their bodies and certainly don't understand why this is an important topic. So, aging, this, I know you know this, is a public health pandemic, right? I mean, age is the #1 risk factor for every disease of the modern world. And, when I step back and think about it, we've basically come to the idea that biological age is malleable, right? That if we can understand how it works, then we can use that knowledge, leverage it to try to extend longevity, right?
And this is an idea that was heresy just probably a decade or so ago, the idea that aging can be thought of as a disease, and that disease can be slowed, stopped, and a lot of conversations about even reversing it right now.
That's true. So modern medicine, I think, has mostly ignored age as a target, as a therapeutic target, right?
Exactly.
But that's changed recently because of basic science, right? Discoveries in basic science have led us to this. And as we step back and start to think about this, part of extending healthy longevity is thinking about equality, right? We want to bring disadvantaged populations together. We want for all of the interventions that we come up with to be available to everyone. And so as we progress through, extending healthy aging, if we don't address reproductive longevity, then gender inequality is going to get much worse, much worse, not better. And so that's where we come in. And every person in the audience should be thinking about this because a woman's reproductive span, so thinking about why we should care about women going through menopause.
And what does society typically think of as a woman's reproductive span? Because the movies paint us as being able to have babies in our 40s, right? And this is a disservice to women who put their they're having families on hold to build their careers.
Precisely. That's exactly right. So like on a societal level, thinking about it that way, you know, every aspect of a woman's life is influenced by the fact that her reproductive capacity is limited, right? By the fact that she's going to go through this reproductive decline in midlife. From the moment a woman goes through puberty, every single decision she makes is going to be influenced by this fact. Questions about her overall health, questions about family planning, questions about, you know, whether or not what she's going to do in her career.
Yeah.
This is all overshadowed by the fact that sometime in midlife, she's going to go through this reproductive decline. So, you know, menopause is literally the worst thing that can happen to a woman's body. So even in healthy women, going through menopause essentially sets off this cascade of negative health effects,
Sure.
Which I think a lot of women don't appreciate until they go through it. So, for example, it increases the risk of cognitive decline, the risk of heart disease, risk of stroke, risk of depression, osteoporosis, arthritis. The list goes on and on. And so, you know, the negative health risks combined with the societal impact, right? This is truly a question of equality, right? Men don't have any of these concerns.
Exactly, and it's interesting, right? In fact, there's a correlation. I remember reading in the materials you provided for us that the later in life you go through menopause, the longer you'll live.
Yes.
And then I love the fact that if your sister went through a later menopause as her brother, you'll live longer as well. But it's not even that. It's the realization that our bodies were never designed to live past reproductive age. 100,000 years ago, right? You'd have a baby at age 13, and then by the time you were 26, your baby was having a baby, and then before food was abundant, the last thing you wanted to do was take food out of your grandchildren's mouths. So most people, you know, were done with life by 30. And so the cascade of consequences post-menopause are massive. And no one really understands. I mean, the public, you understand them, but the public doesn't know. Can you dive into those a little bit more?
Yeah, so I mean, and I should say, you know, we want to be inclusive, and when I say women, I'm talking about anybody who has ovaries.
Sure.
Right, so literally anybody who has ovaries. And ovaries are really, you know, one of the organs that differentiate men and women. And ovaries we talk about them as the canary in the coal mine, literally, for aging. And so aging, you know, in the ovaries happens at about 2 times the rate of aging in the rest of the body. So, you know, when a woman is in her late 20s, early 30s, her ovaries are actually already considered geriatric by the medical community. And that comes as a surprise, you know, not a welcome surprise to a lot of women. So, you know, thinking about why they age prematurely, trying to understand what it is, like what is it fundamentally that causes this particular organ to age so precociously, that will hopefully give us some clues about what's happening in terms of aging in the rest of the body, right? And so you know, you mentioned that a woman's reproductive span, the age at which she goes through menopause is correlated with her overall lifespan, and that's true. So a woman who goes through menopause later tends to live longer. But then her male brothers will also tend to live longer. So for the men in the audience, you know, that might be something to keep in mind. But sorry.
We should differentiate between the function of the ovaries as generating healthy eggs for reproduction and the impact the ovaries have on the entire tissues and hormonal system of the body, right? Because,
absolutely.
And so let's talk about your number of eggs in the ovary. I remember reading start to decline even before the female infant is born.
That is correct.
And that's crazy.
It's crazy.
And then it's like the numbers drop precipitously thereafter.
That's true. So I think a lot of people don't realize that a woman has all of the eggs she's ever going to have when she's 26 weeks in utero.
Wow.
Right? So men can continue to produce sperm all the way until they die, you know, 1,000 sperm per hour for their entire lifespans. But women have all of the eggs they're going to have in utero. Somewhere around 7 million at 26 weeks. By the time she's born, 1 million.
Wow, so you've gone down by sevenfold.
By sevenfold, and we do not understand why that is. So, there's two things that I think are critical to know. We don't understand what makes a good egg. We don't understand why the numbers decline so precipitously. We don't understand anything about where along the spectrum, whether it's before birth, during development, during young adulthood, during midlife, where that causal factor is, where that thing, that biological cue or timer that happens to basically tell the ovaries to start this program to begin to decline.
I mean, and listen, I went through medical school a while ago,
Yeah.
but I would have thought this is like fundamental, understood, easy science to know. And it's really been, so is your team really the first team doing a deep dive into this area?
We are not the first, but there are precious few scientists in the world who have been focusing on this problem. And I'm talking about aging, right? There's plenty of people focused on longevity science and aging science, plenty of people studying reproductive biology, but precious few at the interface there. And that's really because there hasn't been funding in this area, right? And beyond that, there hasn't been funding for women's health in general, right? It's a really dramatic problem. For the past, in 2014 was the first time that the NIH required grantees to include females in their studies.
So one of the issues that I found out that I was shocked about, I mean, just blown away by, was the realization of all of the medical studies being done, all of the drug approvals being done, and guess what? They're being done on men.
That's true.
Not being done on balanced populations. And I remember hearing during our time with Dr. Verdon and your team, it's like it's inconvenient to include women in the studies.
It's considered inconvenient because, the fact that a woman's physiology is more complicated than a man because she's going through these cycles, right? The ovary it's a spectacular organ, but it's complicated, right? It's made up of all these different cell types and compartments. And if you think about it, it undergoes this like dramatic, dynamic, structural remodeling. Like it changes, the whole structure of the organ changes over a woman's cycle. So every single month that's happening. And essentially the cues and the hormones and all of this cyclicity, it adds it adds a layer of complexity to biological signatures. And so people consider that noise.
Yeah, and is my subject group premenopausal, postmenopausal, and such. And so the data, when we're saying that this drug has this impact, it's crazy that it's for a male population, not for a female population. Other stuff I want to get into, and we're going to be going to your questions at the bottom of the hour. But I want to talk about a few key areas here. I want to understand the whole concept of IVF, freezing eggs, freezing embryos. That's been part of society and part of science's answers to giving women more reproductive freedom. But as you said, that's a Band-Aid.
It is a Band-Aid.
Let's talk about that first, and I'll come to a few other subjects.
Sure, no problem. So, IVF, freezing eggs, this is the state of the art. And so I want to be clear that, I don't think that we should stop doing these things. We want to give women whatever is currently available. We want to give them the best options possible. But we've had IVF for 43 years, something like that. And there's been like incremental, if you can call it that, progress. Partly because there hasn't been an impetus, there hasn't been a drive to change anything, because it's economically favorable for a lot of people to keep it going the way that it is. But IVF is, and especially egg freezing, we're making promises to women about things we don't understand. So we don't know.
What is the promise today, and what are the actual numbers?
The promise today is that, a lot of younger women are given this idea that if they freeze their eggs, that they'll be fine. Freeze the eggs, it's like an insurance policy, everything's gonna be great when they get to the age when they wanna have a family. But we don't know what makes a good egg. We don't really understand how to freeze an egg. We don't know how to bring an egg out of freezing properly. We just don't know that information. And so what that means is that, you need for one viable egg to come out of freezing, you need to have 15 oocytes to start with.
Wow. And how many are typically harvested during the process?
It depends on the age of the woman and a lot of other factors, but 15 is a lot.
Yeah.
And if you think about what a woman's body is subjected to during either IVF or egg freezing, it's barbaric. It's very invasive.
Dramatic.
It's very dramatic. Yeah.
And so, what is the potential alternative? So, the work that you're doing, what's your moonshot? What's the vision of reproductive health for women?
Yeah, so the moonshot is we want to essentially understand what causes ovarian aging, and we want to then develop interventions and products and therapeutics to either slow it down or reverse it.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, right, menopause is defined by a woman running out of eggs.
Mm-hmm.
And, we were talking about the number of eggs from going from 7 million to 300,000 when a woman goes through puberty. And then once...
Whoa, when I get those numbers, I didn't realize that. Down another third by puberty.
By the time she actually wants to use her ovaries, she's lost most of the eggs she had.
And then when you're typically, around the world it varies, but here in the United States, for higher educated, career-minded women, it's typically late 20s into even the late 30s. Where are the numbers there?
Really low, so maybe 5% of what she started out with.
Oh.
By the time a woman reaches 40, that number can be 2% of what she started out with. And whenever the eggs run out, whatever that number is, that defines menopause.
Mm-hmm.
And that age is, I think, 52 right now on average. Mm-hmm. But if we could extend that, if we could give women, say, 3% of their original number by the time they're 40, that would be huge. It would be incredibly dramatic because it would push the age at which she goes through menopause much further. And
I think the key point here is it's not for women at 45 or 50 or later to have children. It's to keep your hormonal balance, to keep your health
exactly
longer, right? It's about, a woman's body from the work, what I remember the presentations, are so tied to your to the hormonal milieu around your ovaries. Let's jump into that a little bit. The whole area of estrogen therapy and other hormonal therapies. Where's the state of practice, and what should women know about that?
Yeah, so hormonal replacement therapy is the best treatment that we have to stave off the symptoms of menopause, right? So again, it's a Band-Aid, but it's the state of the art, it's what we have. Mm-hmm. One thing that has been unfortunate is that there was a study done 20 some odd years ago, which was picked up by the popular press, and the headline was, hormone replacement therapy causes breast cancer.
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
Yes, the Women's Health Initiative. And it turns out that is just completely wrong. So, those results were not statistically significant. They were on a population of women who were spread out in age. There were just a lot of problems with it. And so, I think that hormone replacement therapy is a great and viable option for women who are going through menopause to treat the symptoms, to try to restore that kind of a balance. But again, these are all Band-Aids. The goal of what we're doing, so I should step back and say we have established this center, with help from the Biacco Foundation, who were kind of the seed investors in this field. And they had the vision a few years ago to understand that this is an important problem. We started the center. We're working on this problem. We have scientists working on it right now. But
what's the name of the center again?
Oh, it's the Center for Reproductive Longevity and Equality. And
Perfect.
Then there's the consortium. So we think about these as reproductive longevity and equality initiatives at the Buck Institute. And so we're doing the work on the ground to try to understand fundamentally what's going on. But we're only so many people. And so part of what we recognized right away is that because there hasn't been a lot of work in this area before, that what we need to do is build the field. So what we're trying to do, the reason I call this a moonshot, is because we are trying to literally build the fields. And that means that we're trying to not just, engage scientists. That's certainly part of it, right? We want to have, creative scientists, but we also want to bring in like an entrepreneurial spirit and put them in the same room, right?
And also to get the message out, to get the truth out. I know my mom is watching right now, and my dad was an OBGYN, and I think, getting the message out through that community because a woman trusts her doctor, her physician.
Yes.
And what you really need to do is this is what we actually know, this is what we don't know. But I think also creating hope is a really important part of what you're doing. Can you talk a little about what might be possible in the future technologically? I mean, there's the impact of molecules like NMN, which Dr. Verdon has worked on stem cells, on all, what do you think might be possible in the future?
I mean, I think the sky's the limit. I think, you know, our goal truly is to crack this thing wide open. And part of what we're trying to do, as you said, is to galvanize and really just stir up non-scientist advocates to talk about this, but also to bring together people who don't normally talk to each other, right? And so it's talking about, you know, like what products and what innovations are possible. We're trying to get scientists to talk to non-scientists, to talk to clinicians, to facilitate these conversations that typically don't happen, right?
So shockingly so.
Shockingly so, yes. So the consortium, which is, you know, partly we're funding grants, so we're bringing scientists into the field, but that's just a tiny part of what we're doing. We're also trying to build the ecosystem. So that means, I think, doing things very differently. So we're trying to, you know, we want to build partnerships between industry and academia. We basically want to get those scientists to either recognize themselves or to bring in experts who can help them recognize discoveries that they've made that we can translate quickly, right? That's the key, is quickly, because you know, going from the lab to an actual therapeutic or a diagnostic or a product, that can take decades sometimes.
Yeah, it can.
And so we're trying to accelerate that process. That's the goal. And there are tons of targets that are, I think, very promising. Things like mitochondria in oocytes or eggs. Things like inflammation in the ovaries.
Which, by the way, every guy watching, all of the mitochondria in your body come from your mom's egg, right? And it's
yes, that's true.
Yeah, so they're important.
Yeah, and actually, coming back to eggs, I love to. I don't know if you've heard this before, if you heard me say it before, but you know, because a woman has all of the eggs that she's ever going to have in utero, what that means is that, you know, the egg from which I came, even though I was born in the 70s, that egg was created in my grandmother's womb in 1956. So it's like sci-fi, right?
Wow.
It's like Star Trek.
Yeah, that is cool. That is cool. Let's paint a picture, like sort of the 5-year horizon, the 10-year horizon. What's the vision for your center?
The vision is that we have created, we have made advances in the 5-year. I think in the 5-year time frame, the lowest hanging fruit is to think about reframing diagnostics, right? The way that we decide and we measure whether or not where a woman is in her reproductive span, right? And that's variable at the level of the individual. They're primitive. They're really, you know, there's a lot of room for innovation there. Things like taking your temperature. I mean, you know.
Well, it is interesting, right? Like, where am I on that trajectory?
Yeah, and that trajectory.
You can measure all kinds of other things, like your cardiac health, your brain health.
You can wear an Oura ring.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But I mean, there should be metrics so that you can impact this. If you can't impact what you can't measure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of the grants that we've, you know, and the science that we're trying to fund is around looking for biomarkers, looking for signatures of healthy aging in terms of the reproductive system, so that we can have these diagnostics. The next level up would be, you know, thinking about novel targets, right? So you were asking, like, what are the best and most appropriate things to target? We need to do that discovery work. Like, there's really basic science innovation that needs to happen. And then, you know, I think that building this ecosystem out and changing the way that scientists interact with everyone in the outside world, essentially. And so, you know, for the grantees that we funded, and also for the scientists in the center, we put together a translational advisory board because we want to push things, you know, forward faster.
Sure.
We've built a hub facility to bring in scientists from outside.
And is this at the Buck?
At the Buck Institute.
By the way,
yeah.
Which is a beautiful facility. It's gorgeous. In Pei's design.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, architecturally speaking, it's a gem, and anyone who wants to come and visit should, now that we're open again.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, you know, my vision would be that, you know, moonshot, we want to get rid of menopause. We don't need it, by the way. Humans are totally bizarre. You know, there are approximately 5 species of mammals that go through menopause.
Interesting.
So it's not a biological imperative. It's not something that's required. So let's get rid of it if we can.
So that's interesting. So just to be crystal clear, and I teach about moonshots, having a clear definition. So being able to keep what we're talking about here is not having babies into your 80s or 90s. It's keeping your ovaries at full function throughout the rest of your life, so that you have the vitality that you have in your 20s and 30s the rest of your life.
That is exactly right,
Yeah.
and that's a great
which is
definition.
awesome.
Yeah. This whole idea of having babies when you're 80, certainly ovaries are a key component of that, but they're not the only component. You need a functioning uterus. You need a lot of other things to have a baby.
Yeah. So I like that. Let's, and we're going to be going to your questions in just a few minutes, so please get them ready, and I really want to offer as much opportunity for you to learn the details here. But for women who are in their 30s and 40s who are looking to maintain their vitality, is there sort of key recommendations that you have?
Well, I'm not an MD.
Well,
I'm a PhD,
I understand,
but
that the industry has. So hormonal replacement at the right time is one thing.
At the right time is key, right? Because one thing that people maybe don't fully appreciate is that hormone replacement therapy only works if the receptors, the receivers for those hormones are still intact. And when hormones go away, those receivers get downregulated. Yeah. And so starting hormone replacement therapy early is, I think, very important. There's a window of opportunity potentially.
What is that window typically? And I'm not medical advice, I'm just...
No, it's really well established, actually. In fact, we did a webinar about this last week about hormone replacement therapy, so anybody who wants to watch it can. But somewhere between 0 and 6 years after the onset of menopause. Okay. 10 years out, it seemed like there wasn't as much benefit, which makes sense.
So I want to jump into one final subject before we go to the questions here, which is this is again, shockingly, one of the most underfunded fields out there.
Yeah.
And I mean, women should be outraged by it.
Women should be outraged by it. I mean, I was shocked by it when I found out, and everyone that I talked to is shocked by it. And truly, part of the problem is that there hasn't been a lot of public engagement around this idea, right? And there's a lack of knowledge, a lack of communication.
Sure, and like we have Dr. Verdon, David Sinclair, George Church, many, including myself, are talking about the idea of age reversal, that we can do this. A much lower step, in my mind, in terms of degree of difficulty, is going to be to help women preserve function of their ovaries longer in their lives. And that moonshot should be something we're definitely supporting and getting the message out.
And don't forget that we're talking too about, if we can figure that out, this is going to have major knock-on effects and implications for aging and the rest of the body.
Sure.
And for men.
Yeah, absolutely. And it allows women to remain in the game at their highest function much longer in life. So let's talk about, how are you funding this work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, the Be Echo Foundation, Nicole Shanahan, she had this vision. She recognized this really early, that this is a key place where there's a lack of funding, there's a need for innovation, and so we opened the center and started this Global Consortium with funding from Be Echo. And they are the seed funders, but we need them not to be the only funders, right? I mean, what we're talking about doing is dramatic and it's huge. And, I didn't even touch on the economic impacts of menopause. I don't know if you've ever looked at this.
I haven't. How would I think about this?
Well, there's, right now there are about 50 million women in the US who are actively going through or in menopause. Mm-hmm. Every year that's increasing by 2.2 million, but that's just in the US. So the prediction is that by 2025 globally, there are going to be over a billion women in menopause. Wow. And what that means, practically speaking, is that that's going to be more than 10% of the population. And when you think about those negative health effects that I discussed,
so it's the health burden on society.
Health burden, but also economic burden from decreased productivity, right?
In the family, sure.
Yeah, there's these vasomotor symptoms are experienced by something like 80% of women going through menopause, and those are those affect their quality of life to the point where they miss work. right? Things like hot flashes and night sweats and brain fog. So, you know, the lost productivity cost is estimated at 150 billion per year. The lost revenue from increased healthcare costs is estimated above 600 billion a year. So, you know, even if you don't care about any of this for any of the reasons that we already discussed, the economic burden. You should. But you know, if the economic burden is staggering, it's crazy to me that this isn't like on the front page of every newspaper, like that people aren't talking about it more.
And I'm also amazed by the leverage. You know, tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars are a big deal to your program.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the membership you've created, because I'm going to be asking you to join me in the supporting the work that Jennifer and her team are doing. So talk about the membership 1 second.
Right. So we created partly to engage the general public, because scientists have been historically terrible at communicating what they're doing to people.
And you care about things that you support.
Yes,
Yeah.
I care deeply about this.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I'm here.
Yeah.
So we created a membership. It's a tiny amount of money. I think it's $100 a year. It's called OVA. And it's, I think, the best and easiest way for someone who's interested, who wants to stay up to date, who wants to know what we're doing, to stay in contact. So that's easy. You can email ova@buckinstitute.org, or you can go to our website.
So OVA at buckinstitute, one word.org. So here's the deal. It's $100. It's, you know, do it as a tribute to your mom or your sister or your wife or your girlfriend or yourself. I'm buying a membership for every member of my team here at PhD Ventures and the Abundance team. I have also told Jennifer, you're welcome. I also told Jennifer and Eric Verdon that I'm going to match up to $50,000 of memberships that come from the community. So please be generous, buy a membership, or like match the 50K or 10K or whatever it is. Again, shocking about all of these areas of like all of the drug studies, only men, women not understanding the impact of menopause or hormone replacement, fundamental stuff. And then some of the work that you guys have done as well has been to create a physiological replica of the women's reproductive system. Can you just speak to that 1 second? I think it's so cool.
Oh, you're talking about the sort of ex vivo.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and this gets to, you know, some of the maybe the open questions that we hope researchers will start to tackle, and that is, we don't have great models to study menopause or reproductive decline, right? We're not allowed to do many experiments in humans, and they're not a good population to study anyway. So, you know, for basic science to work, we need to have model systems. That's why we do research in cell culture. That's why we do research in model organisms like rodents or, you know. And so the best situation is when you don't have to use an animal, when you can use, you know, say human cells in a dish.
Right.
And in this case, you know, we're talking about a very complex system, the ovary, that has all these different structures inside of it.
What did you call the system?
Let's see, it's called EVATAR.
EVATAR, yes, that's it. EVATAR.
Yeah. But the idea was just to try to build, and you know, this is work that definitely needs to continue, but that could definitely be improved upon too. But the idea is to build an ovary, you know, or the key features of ovaries outside of
a closed cellular model.
That's right.
Where you can put a therapeutic in and see how it affects all the tissues that are impacted within a woman's body.
That's exactly right. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, developing new models, and whether that means you know, a different model system, thinking about, you know, things outside the box like ants, for example. Ants have really cool and interesting reproductive strategies, and there are some things I think we can learn about reproductive longevity from them, all the way up to thinking about, you know, like what would be a novel target. These are all questions, novel targets, novel compounds or therapeutics, and novel model systems. Those are places we want to really invest
Ultimately, let's
capital.
get the smartest scientific minds to recognize the massive opportunity to impact society here.
Yeah.
So again, we're going to go to your questions now. Please consider joining myself and my team in supporting Jennifer's work. We're going to go to Claire Adair. Again, Claire, thank you for your work in helping organize this webinar and the blog we just put out. Let's go to the member questions.
Great, thank you. We have more questions than we can probably field, but I'll start with two questions that share a similar vein from two young female entrepreneurs. One member of our audience is a female entrepreneur interested in healthcare focused on women who asks, do you have any advice for me regarding what niches of this field are in dire need of innovation? And another who asks, what can entrepreneurs do to help drive more attention and funding to women's reproductive health and longevity?
Those are excellent questions, and part of the consortium is building out networks, and so I spend a lot of time talking to early stage entrepreneurs, to people in venture capital who are interested in this space, and so thinking about the niche or the specific areas that could use more funding. I would say that the truth is every aspect of this field is underfunded, and the lowest hanging fruit is certainly, diagnostics and biomarkers and things like that. But again, we have to get at these fundamental, basic science questions. We have to understand what those fundamental cues are. So in terms of, the technology space and the companies that are out there, part of what we need is actually just data, right? So collecting data from large populations of women at different ages, and not just, self-reported data, but, actually measuring hormones over time in different populations of women. Believe it or not, that sort of data is pretty paltry at this point.
Let me just double click on this. When I talk to entrepreneurs and I say, if I were wanting to start a company right now in some field, I would get into a business model of gathering data, because that data can then be analyzed by machine learning neural nets and be of tremendous value. So ultimately, get involved in Jennifer's system and find out what is the data that's most useful, and then how do you creatively get that data from the world? Because there are non-obvious ways to get it super low cost and super organically.
Yeah, exactly. And thinking about bringing together all these stakeholders, right? Because that's truly what we want to do, is bring everybody together and force these conversations that wouldn't normally happen. We've got a couple of things cooking. So one is to bring together all of these early stage biotech leaders and venture capital and other funders, to bring them together for an in-person meeting in the fall. Exactly, a summit. So that, because what I end up doing now is I've got, dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of names where I'm connecting people. I'm like, oh, you got to talk to this person. There's
TED's, the women's TED event. I mean, there should be, the Buck should hold an annual summit on women's reproductive health.
We are going to do that and we are doing that. So we're planning it for 2022, probably in May. We don't have a date yet, but we'll publicize it when we do.
We'll get it out to the community here, and you guys should jump in. Claire, what's the next question?
Yes, we have a question here from Emily, who asks, in my understanding, gynecologists generally speaking advise that women cease taking HRT by age 65 when risks of blood clots and stroke as well as cancer increase. What alternatives to HRT are there to mitigate the negative effects of loss of estrogen on everything from bones to energy levels to skin and hair to vasomotor symptoms?
That's a spectacularly good question, and and it's really important to talk about this, because the increased risk of cancer, that's something that came from the WHI study. Now, it is true that after the age of 65, there is a 1% increased risk of breast cancer.
But you have to measure that against the much bigger risk of everything else.
Exactly. It's a risk-reward balance that you have to weigh, and this is something that every woman is going to be different in terms of their risk, and that's something that they should talk to their doctor about. But this question about blood clots, that really comes down to the method of delivery. So you can take oral hormone replacement therapy, and that gets metabolized by the liver, and that actually increases clotting factors. And so what you want is not to take these things orally. You want to have a patch or a cream or something like that. And so again, the method of delivery, there's a lot of things to consider, but that's the kind of stuff that women should talk to their doctors about. And this comes back to this question of how do you get the information that is currently available? What's state of the art into the hands of physicians, right, who don't necessarily have time to be reading the literature or keeping up on everything that's going on, and conversely, educating women about their bodies. So we're trying to, this is another conversation we're trying to facilitate, to, to give physicians digestible information about what the current state of the art is so that they can translate that to their patients. But then on the other side, giving women at different ages, here's a list of questions you should ask your doctor.
Yeah.
Make it easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Claire.
We have another question here. You mentioned that ovaries age faster than any other part of the body. Can you speak to the most compelling research you've seen that targets how to slow this aging process? Do we know enough about ovaries yet to come up with solutions?
I mean, yeah, no, that is literally what we're trying to do. That is the goal, is to understand what the fundamental drivers of ovarian aging are, to facilitate all of the research in that area. So at this point, I'm a neuroscientist,
Okay.
and so I'm biased. I think that the first domino to fall, that first cue, the thing that triggers all of this, is going to originate in the brain, because
Is it pituitary origin? Or?
I think it's probably in the hypothalamus, but that's just me. But when you think about what the ovaries are doing to influence overall health, right, the hormones and things that they're generating, they can act locally in the reproductive tract, but they also signal between the brain and the reproductive tract. So that's it's kind of like Wi-Fi communication. And understanding that conversation, that chemical conversation between the brain and reproductive organs, and how that changes over time. That's what we work on in my lab, but that's something that a lot of people are working on. But I think that's going to be key.
Great. So, but to answer the question, is there anything right now which is being recommended? I mean, is there, for example, I was reading in Dr. Sinclair's book, Lifespan, which I've commended to many of you, and he was talking about a woman who took NMN, and that brought her, back into menses.
I mean, so there are not any published studies. Well, there's, I would say there's preliminary data. And some of this comes from Dr. Verdon's lab, actually, in collaboration with Francesca Duncan, who is a member of our center. Looking at the effect of NMN and NAD metabolism in general on ovarian health. And there does seem to be, a positive impact. But, how that's going to manifest, what the right sort of dosing and how that will translate into humans, we're talking about rodent studies at this point. Yeah. So it's still, I would say, pretty preliminary, but it's promising, right? Yeah. You're talking about hope.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Claire.
Here we have another question that says, Peter, you stated something along the lines of, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Regarding diagnostics, are there any approaches or innovations that you're particularly excited about that we should be aware of?
So, are there imaging technologies or others that are giving us, what do you measure to understand where a woman is? Is it blood chemistries? Help us, I don't know.
Some of it, yes, most of it is blood chemistry. Some of it is, can be, looking at her, I guess what I would say is that every woman is different, and looking at, not just the impact of blood chemistry, but that's important. And those are actually still things that we need to really solidify in terms of getting large data sets across a large population of women at different ages. But there are other things like genetic background, right? And then interaction with environment. So this is something where I think there will be an impact in the next 5 to 10 years, is understanding how ovarian aging is influenced by and can be pushed in different directions by the environment, whether that means the microenvironment in the ovary, looking at things like inflammation, or literally the environment that a person is living in with their diet, with their overall health. I think those are really, really important. Yeah.
And we're going to be heading in the next few years to a whole new set of wearables, implantables, consumables that are measuring blood chemistries, not once a year when you go for your checkup, but on a continuous basis. And all of that data is going to flow into new models.
Yeah.
Claire.
We have a question here for younger women in our audience and premenopausal women. If contraceptive pills are used to regulate or reduce the number of periods a woman has, isn't she limiting the number of periods, therefore reducing the number of eggs being released? And if so, does that extend the number of eggs in her body for a longer time?
Yeah. No. I thought that was true. I thought that was true for many years. And I think a lot of women do think that. Not true. So it turns out that, so a woman is losing about 1,000 eggs per cycle. And whether you're taking, about 1,000 per cycle from the time they go through puberty, that's what's happening. And, taking contraceptives will keep you from ovulating, that one special egg that gets chosen. But, along the process of developing, the
maturing the eggs,
the follicle, you still lose 1,000. So 999 instead of 1,000, it doesn't really make a difference. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Again, just how ignorant we are about fundamentals.
Yeah.
So we have a few questions here about your moonshot of eliminating menopause, some regarding the pros and some regarding the cons. On one side, we have a few questions that touch on, do you envision any potential downsides to getting rid of menopause? Is there an obvious reason why we developed it evolutionarily? And on the other side, regarding this vision, can you speak to what positive implications this could have for women both individually and for society?
Absolutely.
Great question.
Yeah, really good question. So I'll start with the first question, which is actually fascinating. From an evolutionary perspective, we don't need menopause. And actually one of the members of the center is an evolutionary biologist, and she is studying the evolution of menopause. She's actually writing a book right now. She's amazing. And so I would say that we don't fully understand why women go through menopause from an evolutionary perspective. She's working on that, but we definitely don't need it. So no downside that I can think of.
Yeah. I agreed, and I keep on coming back when you've heard me talking about the field of age reversal and longevity, that our bodies were never evolved to live past age 30. So there was no selective process to keep you alive longer back 100,000 years ago. So the cancers that would hit you, the dementia that would hit you, the menopause that would hit you, you'd already reproduced, and so that it was never selected against.
Right. Yeah. In terms of the positives, we've been hitting on these, I think, pretty regularly through this conversation. But certainly, there's an incredible positive impact on a woman's overall well-being and health. Right. If we could push back the age of menopause, or delay it even a little bit, that keeping the ovaries and all of that signaling stuff, hormones intact. Will dramatically increase a woman's quality of life.
And we're talking about energy, cognitive clarity, and just overall health.
Overall health. Bone density.
Bone density, right.
Yeah, things like arthritis. All of those things, rely on that kind of signaling between the brain and the ovaries by those hormones. But separately from that, I genuinely think that this is an issue of equality, right? Just thinking through the societal impact that menopause has on a woman's choices, right? Whether or not she wants to have biological children, that's irrelevant, right? This is about other things.
And people need to differentiate between ovary as part of your hormonal energy system and ovary as a reproductive organ, and the two are separate.
Right, but certainly, the research that we're trying to engender will have a beneficial effect on fertility as well, right? On thinking about how to help women have children when they want to have them.
Give them control back of their life.
Exactly. Yeah, freedom and choice.
Yep. Claire.
To your point about choosing not to have children, one question we received is, if a woman chooses not to bear a child, is she at greater risk for health issues later in life? I once read a study about nuns that claimed a higher incidence of breast cancer among this population. Those in the study led happy and productive lives, so it didn't seem that the issue was related to psychological well-being or depression.
Certainly, certainly there are studies out there that show a benefit to, not necessarily to having children or not having children, but to the number of children if you have children. So if you have biological children, the more you have, the more positive the impact is on your longevity. So, whether that's cause or effect, I don't know.
The body keeps you alive longer to keep them going.
Who knows why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Claire.
when it comes to other reproductive longevity moonshots, whether it is eliminating menopause, delaying puberty in girls, or extending the window of fertility, do you see these visions ever reaching fruition within our lifetimes? Are they possible, and how long might they take?
Well, that's the $1 trillion question, right? I think certainly on the timescale of 5 or 10 years, we expect to see some dramatic improvement in our understanding of all of these things, and that should give us, I would say, therapeutic, if not therapeutic, therapeutics in the hands of women. Certainly, we should be in preclinical or clinical studies for compounds. We should be understanding biomarkers better so that we can tell women where she is in her reproductive span. And on a longer time scale, I have a lot of confidence that if we can do what we're trying to do, which is to attract scientists to work on this problem, to induce funders to really help us fund this field, and I mean in a big way, then I don't think there's any limit to what we can accomplish here.
Yeah, I mean, this decade ahead is truly one of the most magnificent decades in biology and medicine coming, right? Where we have the convergence of CRISPR and gene therapy and AI, even quantum computers, quantum chemistry is coming into the conversation. And so the scientists are going to focus on where there is an intersection of capital to fund their work and people's greatest demands. And so I think it really is important to bring more capital and bring more awareness to this. And that will then drive people actually doing the work.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as a scientist, I can think it's the most important question in the universe. And if I don't have funding to work on it, then I can't work on it. That's the bottom line. Yeah.
So again, and before we have another 9 minutes here for more questions, we'll go to it. But please do consider joining me. Again, ova@buckinstitute.org is the email. And if you want to join as a member, please do. If you want to join and just fund the work, come alongside me. I would welcome that. Again, massive impact for the planet. Next question, Claire.
We have a question here. How are you and the Buck Institute thinking about women's reproductive longevity in those countries and societies where women are already facing hurdles in gender equality because of cultural norms, lack of economic development, etc.?
That's an incredibly good question, insightful. I appreciate that question. And we have thought about this quite a bit. So the consortium is truly meant to be global, and that means attracting scientists all over the world. But there are cultural, I wouldn't call them barriers, but there are cultural norms that we have to take into account when we're talking about things like fertility and aging and women's rights. So, part of what we've done is to really think hard about what that means. So, one of the things that we're really proud of is that we recently, there's a new center in Singapore that we seeded, and the goal would be to seed these innovation centers all over the world. Things are a little bit different in Asia in terms of how women function in society.
But their biology is the same.
And their biology is different.
Is it?
Yes. So
Okay.
actually there are subtle differences that come with being in different parts of the world. And so women in Asia, for example, tend to have a higher incidence of PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome. And why that is, we don't know. But those are really interesting research questions, and those are the kinds of details that are important to understand when we go in and talk about what kind of research we want to fund there, we want to facilitate there. But at the same time, when I'm talking to people about the consortium, in Asia, I talk about it a little bit differently, right? We just finished a webinar series with Singapore, and I didn't realize that they don't do genetic testing before IVF. But that's something to keep in mind. Similarly, part of what we're trying to do is private funding I think is important, but we also want to bring in public funding, and so we're advocating with the NIH and the NSF and other funding bodies to make this a priority. And we've had some success there, but we're also reaching out to organizations who have an interest in global health, like the WHO, and so we've had conversations with them. We actually were successful in having them include reproductive aging in the materials that they were sending to their member states for the first time ever. This wasn't even on the radar. So yeah, this is something, keeping cultural norms in mind is something that we're really, we're keen on.
And the world changes,
Yeah.
right? And you need to create a clear vision of what is possible. Once we get there, the technology to uplift women's reproductive longevity will disseminate throughout the world in the same way that, not in all cases, but in most cases, women's rights have disseminated over the last good part of the century.
Exactly, yeah.
Next question.
We have two more questions, or room for two more questions. One, Dr. Garrison, you mentioned that there are 5 other species that undergo menopause, including some whales and orcas. Has the scientific community found any insights from these species?
That's an excellent question, and that's what Dina Amira, the evolutionary biologist in our center, is working on. So there are 4 species of whale, but they're not actually on the evolutionary tree. They're not near each other.
Huh.
So
That's strange.
so there's not
Is there a correlation between their length, their longevity, and whether they go through menopause?
No, there's nothing that would jump out at you like that. So I think the answer is we really don't know. But looking at species that are, say, long-lived with respect to their body size, things like that, people have done that. Right now, we don't know. These are open questions. If we could understand
Great time to be a scientist.
yeah, that would go a long way towards helping us crack this problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
We also have a question from one of our Abundance Digital members. What advice do you have for women who were prematurely put in menopause or perimenopause due to interventions because of removal of the ovaries or tumors, cysts on and in the ovaries,
Right.
even if the removal was only a few years ago?
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is something definitely a conversation to have with a doctor. But I don't know if you realize this, but IVF was actually developed originally to help women who had their ovaries removed because of chemotherapy.
Right.
So I think, recognizing that having your ovaries removed will present challenges in terms of, your overall health, and having those conversations with your doctor are probably the best advice that I can give from where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's sneak in one more.
And along those lines, we do have a few questions regarding, for middle-aged women, what can I do today, tomorrow, and long in the future to help improve my life and to help improve my health span?
Is there something that helps women differentially from men in, it's still the same. It's, get 8 hours of sleep, remove sugar from your diet, exercise every day, mom, every day, walk, swim, exercise, and then it's mindset, I think, is so critically important.
Mindset is important. Yeah, you definitely, your neural circuits are malleable.
Yeah.
I think everybody wants a pill, right?
Yeah.
For aging in general, people just want to take a pill, but there are profound impacts of changing your diet and your exercise routine, and just essentially taking care of your body by getting enough sleep. People overlook these things, but those are, I would say, the most important things that anyone can do right now today. But they're also the hardest, I think.
Yeah, they are. Society, our lives are just so fast. It's crazy. Is there anything special that you do to maintain your health?
I exercise regularly. I do get enough sleep. I did not for much of my life. I was chronically sleep deprived. So I get enough sleep. I exercise. I run. I do yoga. I mix it up, right? Because our muscles are they thrive when you do different things with them. Yeah. And I eat a healthy diet. I'm mostly vegan.
Yeah, that's great. So, thank you everybody for joining us. Jennifer, Dr. Garrison, thank you for the work that you and your team are doing. Thank you to the Buck Institute. So let me just make one last request. Join the OVA membership, but Beyond that, consider supporting the work that the Buck Institute does. My 50K matching grant is both for OVA, but also to support the work that the Buck does. So if you want to get involved, go to buckinstitute.org, check it out. Dr. Eric Verdon and his entire team there is extraordinary. And you should know that there's an organization like this on the planet that is working to extend your health span, whether you're a woman or a man. So I've pledged my continuous support to Eric and his team, and I will continue and love what you guys are doing. Help us get the message out. We'll make this webinar available to everybody so you can share it. And send your friends. I'll be tweeting it out. Please retweet it. Again, OVA at buckinstitute.org. Join up, get yourself educated, support the Buck. Jennifer.
Thank you. Thanks so much for letting us talk about this here.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.